Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. We broadcast locally on Radio Northern Beaches and around Australia on the Community Radio Network. I'm really pleased to welcome back to the microphone the Executive Director of the Association of Independently Owned Financial Professionals, quite a mouthful, the AIOFP. Peter Johnson, welcome back.
Thanks, Ray. Good to be back.
Wonderful. We've had Peter on the show a number of times, ladies and gentlemen, and more often than not, because the association is there representing a member group, which I am a member of myself. So for the purposes of clarity and transparency, let people know that I am a member. I'm a paid up member. You'll be happy to know that, PJ, that I am fully paid up.
I certainly hope so, Ray.
But ladies and gents, one of the things that these associations, just like the AMA, just like unions, they're out there representing the best interests of their members. And Peter is a very vocal and active executive director of our association. And I've asked Peter to come on board to the show again, I think, to really highlight, we've got a conference coming up at the end of the year. It's in Canberra, and Pete, we'll talk about that conference in just a moment. But one of the reasons I've asked you on the show is that I'd like you to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world of politics. Why? Because it has a huge impact on financial services. It has a huge impact on investors, and it has a huge impact on you, ladies and gentlemen, as people that are just going about your daily business and trying to make a living, investing your money, and hopefully having something to retire on. So, Pete, welcome to the show. One of the things that you want to talk about is the defined benefit pension super fund for all politicians. Now, this is something that people sort of applauded 20 odd years ago when it was cancelled, but you're not quite of that view, are you?
No, I'm not, because it's had severe ramifications for our political system. Now, if we go back to 1948, which is when the Parliamentary Contributory Act was first put in place, and this is where they gave the sitting members a pension after a qualifying period of 12 years. They got around 75% of their wage as a retirement package. And unlike everyone else back then, they couldn't get access to super, whereas the politicians, if they were 20, 30 or 40 or 50, after their parliamentary term of 12 years, they could actually get this pension, which what it did, it attracted all the right people into politics. Now, what has happened is what happened in 2004, John Howard cancelled it, because he was getting pushed by Mark Latham at the time, who was the leader of the opposition, and Latham was kind of challenging him in the polls, and Howard reacted and suddenly called a press conference and said, right, we're now going to cancel this pension. And of course they made it, they grandfathered it, so all the politicians sitting in it got looked after, of course.
Everybody after me, yes.
The old self-interest wins everything. So what has happened is there is very few people left in Parliament who are actually on the pension, because it cancelled 20 years ago this year. In fact, it was on June the 20th, I think, last year was when. June the 20th, 2004 was when the first reading went into the Senate. And then what happened, all the states then followed suit. So all politicians around Australia, both at state and at federal level, haven't been part of a pension fund since, if they've been in politics after 2004.
But hang on, they still get a parliamentary salary, and I think as a public servant, they get 17% super, don't they?
Oh yes. They still get their parliamentary wage, and they still get their superannuation entitlement, but it's not like which is what everyone gets anyway. But what they get now since 2004 is not what they had before. Now I'll give an example. I was doing the numbers this morning. Now with Anthony Albanese, he's currently on $607,500 wage. Okay. If he loses at the next election and he decides to retire tomorrow, his pension will be 75% of that, which is $455,625 for the rest of his days, which is what the taxpayers are funding. Now, if he died, well, when he dies, of course, we all die. His spouse will pick up 5/6 of that. So his spouse will get around $400,000 for the rest of her day. This is why whenever we see spouses of politicians in the old scheme, they're always smiling, and you know why?
especially when the old man kicks the bucket, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, this is where it's been no mere coincidence. Back 30, 40 years ago, all the older politicians would have young wives because yeah. So anyway, we won't say any more about that. So anyway, the bottom line is that that this fund was probably too generous. But what has happened since then, because this pension is not in place since 2004, it's making it very difficult for both sides of politics to actually recruit the right type of people into politics, right. Especially the Liberal Party, because on the Labor side it's more ideologically driven back through the union movement, etc. But especially on the Liberal side, it's very hard to get the right people in there because they haven't got a guarantee of a pension, and they put up with all the stuff which happens in Canberra. So what we've seen over the past 20 years is a gradual degradation of the quality of politician. Now, if you look in recent times, I won't mention names because I'll probably get sued. But over the last few years, you've seen some of the antics of some of the politicians, and it's just not a good look. Now, we had a recent example of a former Prime Minister, I won't mention who, but he just recently retired out of politics, and he should have gone at the last election, but he couldn't because he did not get a pension. Okay, so he was waiting to get a job. He couldn't get a job because he'd been tainted, and that's not a very good look for a Prime Minister of Australia who'd been in the job for nearly 2 terms, that he couldn't afford to get out of politics. And this is where I've also noticed myself over the last 25 years dealing with Canberra. Just the intellect is diminishing. And then what we've got, the problem we've got at the moment is that Treasury there run everything. If you've ever watched that, the old BBC Yes Minister show.
Yes Minister, yes.
You've got Sir Humphrey Appleby running the rings around all these politicians, and the basic bottom line is politicians come and go, but the public servants are always there. But again, we've got a problem there, which we've proved in recent times with that 99 FA legislation, is that Treasury put up a flawed legislation. The politicians agreed to it because they didn't know any better. But then we saw the opinion of a King's Counsel, a chap called Bernard Quinn, and he came out and said, well, virtually the legislation which Treasury put up and the government put up was actually flawed.
Mm.
So this is a problem happening with Canberra, that it's gradually going backwards with intellect and also ethics, and I personally think they should bring back a pension fund of some description, so we start getting the right type of people into politics. Anyway, that's.
I guess, PJ, it's one of those things that I think will be an ongoing debate, and one of the things that certainly when you think about that time when John Howard did cancel that, it was under a fair bit of political pressure, but it was universally applauded. But again, like many bits of legislation, the unintended consequences, like you've just talked about there, where Treasury still runs the roost, whoever controls the purse strings controls the agenda. And we find that that's very much the case. Now, moving on to the AIFP's conference, which is going to be held in November of this year, we'll be going.
Yes.
There's a number of things that are going on there. And given much of what the association is doing at the moment is quite topical in the financial services industry, because there's been a fair bit of discussion with Minister Jones, who is the Financial Services Minister, and much around the CSLR, the scheme of last resort, and again a particular fight that you've taken up on behalf of, I guess, the general populace in regards to the Dixon Advisory scandal, and we'll cover that in due course. But I think one of the things that people are aware of is that between now and I think May or June of next year, and a federal election has to be held because it'll be 3 years. So very briefly, Pete, what's the association looking at doing in this space with regards to the upcoming federal election?
Well, we think the only time to get anything changed is leading into an election, because you've got the politicians just don't listen to you. They've got their own agenda. Most of them are dictated by Treasury, which what happens is that because Stephen Jones, for instance, is the current minister. He was in opposition for about 9 years, and suddenly he's minister, and he's only had 3 staff. Okay, so then he says, "Hell, I need to get some more staff because I'm now the minister." And suddenly, what lands on his desk is a whole pile of CVs from people from Treasury. So straight away he gets infiltrated, and then his office is run by the agenda of Treasury, and that's what's happened. So, Stephen Jones is a very decent human being, but unfortunately he's being kind of overshadowed by these Treasury people. He started off well because what he put in place was the 10-year rule on educational pathway, which means that someone just needs 10 years continuous service within the industry, and they don't need to get a degree, whereas any new entrants must get a degree. So he stood up to that. He put that up before the last election. Jane Hume, who was minister at the time, agreed with it. So therefore we had it locked in. Now, but what has happened since then is that Stephen Jones has been caught up with a bit of internal logistics, and the problem is he hasn't kind of fulfilled his promises. Now, he still may do them, but the fact is it's nearly 3 years now, and he's just been a bit slow, and a lot of it's been to do with a lot of politics within his office with Treasury, etc. And but what we're going to look, the Achilles heel of any political party is their marginal seats. Okay, we've got there's seats at the moment within both sides of politics where they're on less than 1%. Now what that means is every electorate's designed to have about 100,000 voters. This is why the ones in the city are small geographically, but the ones in the rural areas are big because they got to try to get 100,000 voters in there.
Sure.
And if you're only on a 1% margin, that means only 1,000 people have to vote against you at the next election, and
it changes. It changes,
and you're out of your seat. So we're going to have a bit of leverage on that. Excuse me, with our members, because what the politicians have worked out is that everyone used to be scared politically of doctors. Now, doctors, I can't remember the last time we discussed politics or money with your family doctor, right? But what the politicians are now realizing is that advisors speak about politics and money the whole time with their clients.
Well, I guess, PJ, they're kind of forced in that regard because policy impacts them on a daily basis. But look, let's hold that thought for a moment. We're just about time for a break. You're here on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing. I'm here with the Executive Director, Peter Johnson of the Association of Independently Owned Financial Professionals. We're going to take a short break and be back in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson. At the microphone this week, I'm really pleased to have Peter Johnson, the Executive Director of the AIOFP, the Association of Independently Owned Financial Professionals. Now, Pete, before we went to the break, we were talking about marginal seats and the fact that only a small number of votes are needed to sway one way or the other, a win or a lose. And given that we are on the run-up now to the next federal election within potentially the next 6 to 9 months, I guess the association's keen to get out there and mobilise. And the conference that we're going to be going to at the end of November in Canberra, I think is going to be an opportune time, one would suggest.
Yes, well, what we're doing there, Ray, is on the Friday, on the Monday night, the 25th of November, we've booked a space in Parliament House where we'll have our members. And then who we've invited is 6 politicians, lesser known ones, who all sit in marginal seats. Now, the most marginal seat in Australia is the one of Gilmore, which is in the southern coast of New South Wales. Right. And the person there is only on a 0.17% margin, which is 170 people.
Right? Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
And we have one member there with 300 clients. So this Fiona Campbell, who's the politician there, she's got a bit of a battle if suddenly this one member says, well, we don't like what you're doing. We need all our clients to actually vote against you. The reason why consumers are so much interested in this area, and if they're not aware of it, they should be aware of it, is that all these additional costs put on financial advice ultimately gets charged back to them, because the advisor cannot absorb it, so they pass it on. This is where the cost of an SOS, statement of advice, these days is at least $3,000, right? Which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it has blown out, hasn't it, Pete?
Oh, it has. Look, it's just ridiculous. What happened in the Royal Commission was that the banks got caught for the fee for no service fiasco, where they were taking money out of people's bank accounts and not delivering a service, because the banks could do that because they were all bank clients at the time. So what Senator Hayne put in place, which was understandable, is some consent forms which the client had to sign off on, right? But what has happened since then is the banks have left advice, and all these ridiculous compliance regime is still in place.
Still in place, yeah. And they haven't kept up.
Oh yeah, and we've been trying to say to all the politicians, this is no longer applicable, because you know who's paying? The client.
Poor old schmuck, at the end of the day.
Yes.
I guess, Pete, one of the things that's concerning, and you've asked me to come back to the conference to talk about artificial intelligence and robo advice, because I come from an IT background and I specialise in that. I guess one of the things that's going to be of concern is that the quick fix politicians are going to be out there talking to you and saying, well, look, Pete, we don't need as many advisors anymore. We've got robots and computers to do that. Well, how do you respond to that kind of comment from a politician that's going to tell you that, you know, the banks and the big insurers are telling me that tech's the answer? Is that necessarily a way forward?
Well, look, we think it's got its place, but it's nowhere near what people expect it to be. If we go back to 2012, 13, back then they thought robo-advice would take over, digital advice would take over, and you know, there wouldn't be a human inside. Now that just is not the case. In fact, it's really dropped off, to be quite frank. But it has limited applications. But people want to still deal with people. They don't want to deal with a computer. They don't want to deal with digital solutions. So what we're trying to say to the politicians, which we're going to try and force in place by using our marginal seat strategy, is that there's some things they have to fix, because all these costs are going back to the consumer. And all we have to do is tell our members' clients that this is why the cost is $3,000. It should be $1,000, for instance, because it's due to all this compliance ridiculous situation, which Treasury failed to recognise. And this is so frustrating for us, because you've got all these public servants in Treasury sitting in that bubble in Canberra, who've probably never been in business. They've probably never seen the consumer, and they're the ones who are giving their views on how the industry should be structured. And to be quite frank, they know nothing. And this is the frustrating thing about it, is that the public servants are pushing these agendas. Now, over the next 4 or 5 months, because of the self-interest of politicians wanting to keep their seats, now's the time to strike hard while the bureaucrats are out of the way, because they won't be able to influence the outcomes. If it's done over a 2-year period, they can influence outcomes. But short term, when you have a politician saying, "Hell, I want to save my seat, we're going to do this," that is the time to hit.
I guess
exactly what we're doing.
I guess the cynical ones in amongst us, and you and I have you don't have any grey hair. I can't see any there in the frame, but those of us that are still with the little remains that I've got that are going grey rather quickly can remember that this is the right time, I guess, to move.
It is.
I guess I'm also curious, because one of the things that I've always noted, being a recent member of the association only for the last sort of 2-3 years or more, but I guess you invite people from all persuasions. You're not certainly, just Labor or Liberal. You've invited people from the Greens. You've invited people from Jackie Lambie's organisation, the One Nation people, a whole range in that regard. I am curious though, because I live in an electorate now that since the last federal election, this was taken over by a Teal, and she successfully won against a long-standing federal member and changed the colour of this seat that hadn't changed since 1945. Now, given that there are 6 Teals at the moment, and I'm reading just recently that the Climate 200 that are bankrolling a lot of these Teals are now targeting another 9 coalition-only seats. Has that come into your thinking at all, Peter?
Yes. Well, look. We think. Look, the Teals have no power. I mean, we think it's a waste of time voting for them.
Okay.
Because they have no power, and what they've been doing in recent times is dealing directly with the Greens, which I think all those people in those seats probably didn't expect that to happen. So look, I'm not a great supporter, not of the individuals, just the fact that they are really irrelevant, to be quite frank. Now they may become more relevant at this next election, but we just don't think it's a good idea having a government, whether it's Labor or Liberal, actually having to have other parties involved, like the Greens or the Teals. They should be should be voted up within their own right.
But I mean, the current situation we've got is that the balance of power in the upper house is with the Greens, and again, I was reading with interest and amazement that the words double dissolution are now coming across some journalists' lips, which I must say, if they're going to do a full review and the entire Senate comes up for grabs, that could change the stakes quite a lot, because we can't just think about the lower house. The upper house is going to have an impact as well. I'm just curious. It's an awful lot of bases to cover, Pete. Is that something that may be a bridge too far for the association?
Well, we are targeting certain areas, because what we'd like to try and do is get a bipartisan agreement before the election. So therefore, if we can do that, we will stay out of the way. If we
good idea. It's a good idea. I mean, they actually got together and signed something just recently together, didn't they?
Yep. So we are there's 4 or 5 things on our agenda which we're going to push. The first one is that we're going to push that the risk insurance conditions, which have the risk insurance industry is in disarray. It's been poorly dealt with over the last probably 10 years, and we need it to return to its pre-LIF.
LIF, yeah, I was going to mention the LIF.
The legislation.
Okay. So, Pete, look, we've had a bit of a technical issue. We were talking about the LIF provisions. I know that you've got 4 other requirements that you're going to be putting forward to the conference. If we can cover those off quickly before the show wraps up, what are they?
Well, the first one is the Dixon failure. We want that removed from the CSLR, which is the Compensation Scheme of Last Resort. We think it's totally unfair.
Okay, that's one.
We want the consent forms abolished. We
Okay.
want RIS returned to its pre-lift conditions. We
Uh-huh.
want the legislation 99FA to be in line with Bernard Quinn King's Council recommendations, which
Okay.
showed that what the police put up with was flawed. We want the SOA, the statement of advice, to be replaced with a document based on the advisor's professional judgment. So leave it up to the advisor to decide what their client needs.
Actually put a bit of trust in people that have a professional qualification, just like they do lawyers and
of course they do. And if it doesn't work, you go to AFCA and you get refunded. It's quite simple. And the current best interest duty and safe harbour conditions should be maintained to protect consumers. We think the best interest duty should stay in place.
So look, Pete, I think in light of the fact that we've been pushing on these reforms as an association for quite a number of years, this is not going to be news to the people that we've been talking to over this period of time. So look, we're hopeful that we'll get an audience while we're in Canberra. Peter Johnson, look, I know you're an absolutely fearless, I guess, proponent of the cause that you are out there on behalf of the association. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show and really tell people about what's going on and what's going on in the background that's trying to help everyday consumers. So Peter Johnson from the AOFP, thank you very kindly for being on Dollars and Making Sense.
It's great for me. Thanks, Tom.